What did Saul do in 1 Samuel 18 to try and get David killed? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 1 Samuel on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Samuel 18 verses 17 to 30, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to 1 Samuel chapter 18 verse 17, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Samuel chapter 18, beginning of verse 17. Then Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you as a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles." For Saul thought, "Let my hand not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him." So David said to Saul, "Who am I, and what is my life or my father's family in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king?" But it happened at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel, the Meholathite, as a wife. Now Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. So Saul said, "I will give her to him, so that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." Therefore Saul said to David a second time, "You shall be my son-in-law today." And Saul commanded his servants, "Communicate with David secretly, and say, 'Look, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now therefore become the king's son-in-law.'" So Saul's servants spoke these words in the hearing of David. And David said, "Does it seem to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing I am a poor and lightly esteemed man?" And the servants of Saul told him, saying, "In this manner David spoke." Then Saul said, "Thus you shall say to David, 'The king does not desire any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to take vengeance on the king's enemies.'" But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. So when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to become the king's son-in-law. Now the days had not expired. Therefore David arose and went, he and his men, and killed 200 men of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in the full count to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him Michal his daughter as a wife. Thus Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was still more afraid of David. So Saul became David's enemy continually. Then the princes of the Philistines went out to war, and so it was, whenever they went out, that David behaved more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name became highly esteemed. In chapter 17, we had David kill Goliath, and Israel obtain a great victory over the Philistines. Some time has passed, but because the people esteemed David as a greater warrior than Saul, Saul's disposition towards David soured, for he thought that all David had left to obtain from him was the kingdom. David would make no attempt on the kingdom, but jealousy and paranoia of Saul because of sin would lead him to do eviler and eviler things as time progressed. For instance, when David came to soothe Saul by playing the harp, Saul tried twice to kill David with his spear. The Lord was with David, and so David escaped, something that made Saul even angrier. Coming out of verse 17, it appears that even more time has passed, but how much time we do not know. Recall back in chapter 17 that the promise of Saul that whomever defeated Goliath would be given his daughter in marriage. David was a youth at the time and probably too young for Saul's liking to marry his daughter, but with the small passage of time, Saul returned to his vow and offered his older daughter Merab to David. Now Saul had 2 single daughters, and so as was custom, the older daughter would be married off first in this type of arranged marriage. Saul's motives for doing this weren't pure though, for as a condition of marriage was that David fight the Lord's battles for him against the Philistines. What Saul thought was that David would be killed during one of those battles, and thus Saul would be rid of a supposed contender to the throne. David, though, knew his place in Israel, as from one of the least families in Israel, and so didn't think it proper to be son-in-law to the king. And so Saul didn't give Merab to David, but to Adriel the Meholathite as a wife. Make a note of this name, for we will come across it again in 2 Samuel 21. Saul's younger daughter, Michal, fell in love with David, and seeing as how David wasn't given to her sister, there was an opportunity for her to be given to David. This pleased Saul, who was still trying to have the Philistines kill David. Perhaps the fact that Michal actually loved David would get David to change his mind about becoming the king's son-in-law. But initially it didn't, and for the same reason. He was of the lowliest of the houses of Israel. Now, to modern eyes, this might seem like a silly reason, for we see wealthy or powerful people marry commoners all of the time. But we must realize something. Marriage in that time required a dowry be paid by the family of the groom to the father of the bride in exchange for his daughter's hand in marriage. This was done in order to compensate the family for the loss of someone who could be of use to work in the household. This practice is frowned upon today as people see this as women being treated as property. And while I'm not going to deny that in some cultures this was the case, it didn't have to always be the case. Family units in that time were much closer than they are today, with each person playing an integral role. A grown daughter could be useful to the family to care for the animals or make clothing, whatever, which could bring profit to the family. Losing such could cost the family money, and so a dowry system was developed in order to mitigate some of the financial loss the family would incur through the daughter marrying. Today, we generally don't practice such, and there's nothing wrong with that. But let's not judge other cultures from 30 centuries ago, always casting upon them evil motives for where our cultures differ in how we practice things. For David, though, not coming from a wealthy family meant he couldn't pay a sufficient dowry to the king for his daughter's hand in marriage. This didn't matter to Saul, for he only set the dowry at 100 foreskins of the Philistines so that he could have vengeance against his enemies. In truth, Saul thought David would die in battle, and again he would be rid of what he thought was a threat to his throne. Why did Saul choose the foreskins to be brought to him? Because the Philistines were often referred to as uncircumcised, meaning Gentiles, and thus this would be proof that David had in fact killed Philistines and not somebody else, with many of the neighboring countries practicing circumcision too, due to them being related to Abraham. This saying pleased David, and so not only did he go out with his men and do what Saul asked, he did more than Saul asked by killing 200 men of the Philistines and bringing back their foreskins to Saul. I'm sure that Saul was surprised by this, but he was true to his word and gave Michal to David as a wife. However, sending David out to fight the Philistines had the opposite effect that Saul wanted, for it only grew David's fame and prestige among the people. And as that happened, Saul's animosity towards David only grew. But David's fame didn't change David, for he still behaved prudently when before the king and when he wasn't before the king. As for the Philistines, David's actions only inflamed an already angry people, so that they went to war with Israel, something we'll see in future chapters. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 1 to 10, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.